I doubt very highly I would have been elected to lead them had they known that I have such difficulty in reading and writing. Welcome. We're talking disability identity today, and it's far more than a medical diagnosis. I think a lot of times in our culture we think of disability identity and maybe compare notes. You're like, oh, what do your diagnoses say? Well, that's not disability so much as maybe a way to get prescriptions, a way to get treatments, a way to be eligible for services, a way to qualify legally for different legal protections or government programs. Those pieces of paper, we've highly medicalized the legal system with respect to disability. We have highly medicalized existence with differing abilities, having bodies that work differently, brains that work differently. But disability to me is less about a medical diagnosis and more about a cultural identity. I'm a middle-aged white guy, relatively white beard. My hair isn't getting that white. There is a bit of white in there. So a middle-aged white guy. That is a couple of identities thrown in there. But I also have always been and will always be disabled. I was born with a congenital heart defect and was not expected to live long, but again, I'm a middle-aged white guy, so I did grow pretty old. I hope to continue growing old. It does slow me down a bit, but I also am neurodivergent. I have real difficulty reading, but I have incredible ways of thinking. We'll explore some of that a little bit more, either with me as an individual or bring some other people on to interview. But the ways my brain thinks, I wouldn't trade for anything. So maybe it doesn't fit with how a lot of people think of disability, but we'll loop back to that in a second. Recently had to start mental health medications because my mental health has not been working too well for me. I've always been a relatively morose, non-joyful person, but it's catching up with me. So we've got lots of ways of medicalizing all of those conditions. But we also have, separate from that, social ways of relating to one another and economic ways of showing up at work or of qualifying for benefits, legal ways of avoiding discrimination or at least pushing back against discrimination when it happens. So let's talk a little bit about identity. It is not purely medical, it's not purely legal, and it's not purely social. But today we're going to talk about identity. I'm going to ask if you'll think a little bit about identity. How did you come to your disability identity? Maybe you're still in the process. I mean, aren't all of us in the process of learning who we are throughout our entire lives? So I don't expect anyone's done, like they have a static sense of self. But there are folks who've thought a lot about identity, and their identity is perhaps quite nuanced. And then other folks who, fit into relatively standard boxes that are set up by society and don't examine identity much. And this might be a new conversation. So whether you've been thinking far longer than I have about disability identity, or you're just thinking about it for the first time today, it never occurred to you that disability is something other than a medical diagnosis. Love to hear from you in the comments below, or you can direct a message on any of our social media. And if you're interested in being on a podcast and having one of these conversations on mic, on camera, that'd be awesome. We can talk about how you have come to your disability identity and maybe how your family, your community, your employers, your friends, your school, how they related to your disability identity over time, how they relate to it now. But as for me, how did I come to my disability identity? Well, when it comes to my heart, that was always drilled into me from a very young age. It's something I need to be concerned with. When I first go to school, the very first show and tell every year was me. I had a little book. I'd take my book and have pictures of me going to the cardiologist and showing what an EKG is. And maybe that was interesting to some kids, but I think the main benefit of that is that people knew if I fell down on the playground, it's probably pretty serious. It's not me feigning a concern. You should, call somebody. So that was always top of mind. I'd go into Children's Hospital a lot, getting lots of tests, and this is in the days before echocardiograms. So in order to look at your heart, they'd have to run wire up through your femoral artery in your groin up to your heart, and then look at it. So I'd have to be put out. That was, more medically intensive than most kids going in, getting a flu shot or whatever. But I thought a lot about that. I did not think as much about how I think and process information. That came to me later when I went to school, and it became evident that I write and think and talk differently than a lot of other kids in my classes. And that was not usually seen as a strength. I don't know that it was ever seen as a strength in school. It was always a problem. I was always told I'm not living up to my potential, that I would not accomplish anything because I was too lazy. I know I was working very hard. I know I was exhausted mentally. I also knew that I was getting the substantive knowledge relatively quickly, and that wasn't the problem. You can give me a test on what we were supposed to know, and I could answer everything right. I just couldn't do the process the same way everyone could, or the same pace everyone else could. And that was a problem. I barely graduated high school. But again, my family didn't really believe in accommodations. There were lots of conversations about how I was a problem, and lots of recognition that I was dyslexic and likely had ADHD too, but not really any desire to either get accommodations or medication or deal with that other than just work harder. I don't know that worked for me because I barely graduated high school, but when I got to college, I started to excel. But I was not open about my disability. Some people could tell, like my psychology advisor, he got it. He could tell. Well, the psychology was my undergrad, so that's why I had an advisor in psychology. He advised that, I take some technical writing focus, that I, hunker down in some of those particular areas in gaining some discrete skills. Not necessarily work harder. He knew sort of I could process information really well, but in gaining particular skills to work smarter in some of those areas. Went to law school because that's a whole nother story. We'll maybe have a podcast where we talk to some people about their paths to advocacy, and maybe I'll share a little more about that. But I was not open about my dyslexia in law school. I pity my law professors. I don't know how they read my exams. They're very difficult to read. But I did well there. I was the editor-in-chief of the Law Review, and I doubt that in order to be that, you're voted in by your fellow students who are on the Law Review. And I doubt very highly I would have been elected to lead them had they known that I have such difficulty in reading and writing. But I make up for it in creative and analytical thinking skills. So I kept my disability pretty private for a long time. That doesn't mean I didn't identify with it. It just meant I knew it wasn't safe to share that. I even worked for a disability organization for a while and wasn't especially open about it. I didn't, at that point, work on hiding it. I just also didn't lead with it. I think there are some pros and cons to that. And I talked to lots of lawyers and judges and other people in sort of professions where being out about being neurodivergent or other invisible disabilities or the mental illness or dyslexia or autism might impact their access to clients or to job assignments or otherwise hamper their reputation. I often talk to folks about coming out because I am out about my disability and now lead with it, but haven't always. I don't. Sometimes I feel shame about not being especially open about that, but other times I recognize that was just my path. That's where I came from and what I was dealing with, both internally and the external forces that were at play at any given time. But let me give a little story about why I decided to start leading. Instead of, when it comes up in conversation, I might raise it, or if someone asks, do you need an accommodation, I'll let them know, yeah, if it's longer than a page or two, I would like a week. One, I'm very busy, and two, I need time to read through it and think about it. If you want me to think about it, then give me the written materials a week in advance so that I can carve out a period of time to read it. If you give it to me right before the meeting, it's not going to be read. If you give it to me in the meeting, I will complain quite a bit. So it would come up from time to time, but I did not lead with it. I decided to lead with it when I was in a meeting with some judges. I'm a lawyer. I was going to say just a lawyer, but I think lawyers have an important, distinct, not hierarchically lower, but just different role than judges in a courtroom. But judges are very important in courtrooms and very important in our legal system. So I was pleased to be invited to this group. There was a group of judges that invited me to join them in reviewing resumes for a scholarship. And I thought, well, I really, I'm quite honored to be invited to participate in this, to help select what law student will get a scholarship for their next year, based on what sort of public interest work they'd been doing for their community over the earlier parts of their legal career. So it was me and 3 judges. And I knew these judges respected me. One, they invited me there, but we're in meeting spaces a lot together, or I've had folks introduce me, and I knew that I was well respected, and that's why I was in this space. So when it came time to review these applications, I was reading them, they were reading them. We came together to compare notes, and everyone could agree that of all the applicants, there was one who had done substantively a lot more community support. They'd really helped their community a lot more than everybody else. Then there was a next person who'd done, a decent amount, but not nearly as much as the other person. However, the person who had done the absolute most had some typos in their cover letter. And now, do I advise you have typos? No. But I will say this scholarship was sort of advertised as being low barrier. Just write a page or two about what you've been doing, and we will review that and go over it. Not a long, drawn-out thing you're supposed to spend hours on. You're supposed to throw your hat in the ring if you've been doing community work. We don't want this to be a huge barrier to get the money. You've already done the work. Just show us what your work was. That was sort of how this was presented to folks. So we had people put their info together. And there's a lot of talk about how horrible it is to have typos in materials you present to judges, and how horrible it is to have typos that you're going to be putting in court and all of that. And again, I don't advise typos. I think you should work at getting rid of typos. However, if the goal of the scholarship is to give money to a student who has really benefited their community, there was one student who clearly, above all others, had invested far more hours and far more outcome to benefit more members of their community than all of the rest. And I thought that was clear who that individual was. And I spoke up. I said, I get it. I will concede it's not good to have typos. Again, editor-in-chief of the Law Review, our whole job is to find typos that law professors and other scholarly legal people, they've written articles and we're nitpicky. Is this comma in the right spot? Is this the right way to cite to a law review article from another country? Is this the right way to structure the sentence, or is it a little too confusing and we should flip this clause before that clause? So I get it. The law is filled with nerds who love grammar and syntax and spelling. And I chose to be in this profession. That's my fault, not the profession's. But with that said, I gave all this preface. I think the goal of the scholarship is to give it to someone who's doing social justice work. This person's doing the most social justice work. I myself am dyslexic. I see a lot of these mistakes as being things where your spell check wouldn't catch it because you transpose some letters, but it's the same. It's another word. It's just not the right word. And so maybe this person didn't take this as seriously as a practicing lawyer or a judge would have, but we did kind of set them up to say, hey, this is low barrier. Just submit your application. Tell us what you're doing. And we want to reward people for doing social justice work. And, I felt like I was putting myself out there. I'm, leading with my disability saying, hey, I don't know this person, but I want to vouch for these are the silly types of mistakes that you might make when your brain doesn't see words the same way as everyone else's and put them together the same way everyone else does. But I understand what they're saying. You understand what they're saying. Can't we overlook the 3 or 4 typos that were in this and say, on the substance, this person is doing the social justice work. Let's sit down and talk with them about, you got the scholarship, but next time around, double check it. Have someone else look at it. Now, I also shared with folks, I've got an assistant. At that time, I don't currently, but I had an assistant who I would write a letter and I'd say, hey, could you take a look at this before you send it out? And assuming there aren't any problems, send it out. And if there are problems, fix them and send it out. I'm pretty sure this law student who's doing all this social justice volunteer work doesn't have an assistant to look over their work. And all of these judges had clerks who could review things for them or just write things for them. And then they would review them and edit them and put them out as their own. So let's not be too harsh. So I gave this impassioned personal plea and everyone's like, yeah, no. Let's take a vote. And they gave it to the person that I think objectively was the number 2. So I guess that's a really long way of saying, I thought I was well respected by these people. I thought that I had access to a room where other people with disabilities similar to mine may not have access. I needed to educate these people. And even then, it wasn't enough. So I need to start educating sooner. I need to start talking more about this. And so when I used to give lots of presentations to judges and lawyers and other community members around disability law. So whenever I'd give a presentation, several a year, I would lead with, this is how I'm coming into it identity-wise. I think identity is important because you can't see my disability identities if you just met me. Now, if you've read some of my emails that I'd send to you, or you work in the same office space as me, or you're in a meeting with me, you will see things that are the product of my disability. You may not immediately put them together, but if you yourself have a similar disability, or there's someone in your life who has that disability, or you've worked with someone with that disability before, it's not an invisible disability. You can see it quite clearly. Like, yeah, that's David, and he thinks differently. But and I recognize that's related to neurodivergence. His brain's just wired differently. And if you have all of those experiences, you probably know how to benefit from the strengths that my disability brings and not get too hung up on, did I write form instead of from. But if I did do that, or I don't know which there to use, or I don't know how to spell occupation, or some other word with lots of repeat consonants or vowels in it, well, then if that's what you're hung up on, you will lose the benefit of knowing the rest. So one thing I try to do is lead with a disability identity conversation so that people can make more conscious decisions, not let their biases around, oh, I think people who don't use commas right are not that smart. I've got those. I love Oxford commas. I hate grocers apostrophes. I can geek out on all that stuff. But you know what I don't do? I don't judge people on it because I know I'm not naturally good at it. And I've spent a lot of time trying to get better at it. And if this isn't a competition on how to best spell check or grammar check something, and instead just people living their lives and building a community together, working alongside each other, trying to get work done, then I'm measuring how much work are you getting done? How are you contributing to your society in a positive fashion? How are you contributing to the community we have in a way that helps your neighbor? Those are the things I'm going to be looking at, and not too worried about whether or not you use your grocer's apostrophe. It might be a little joke to myself, but that's it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But it's not it's not determinative of whether or not we can work together. So that I started to lead with disability. And as I did, that's when I had a lot more people open up to me publicly. Before that, I had lots of really good in-depth conversations with friends of mine, with colleagues of mine who knew how my brain works differently. Maybe their brain works differently and in a different way. And we'd compare notes of like, oh, how was that meeting for you? Or what do you think of that argument? And we'd be able to say, oh, that's interesting. I would have never thought of it coming from that direction. But when I started to lead in my presentations with identity, then other people could reciprocate and approach me and say, you know what, I have never had someone to talk to about this, or I've only had one other person who I could talk to about this, or I'd love to come out and, with my invisible disability and talk to all the attorneys who appear in my court, but I don't know where to start with that. What are some thoughts around that? So I've really appreciated getting to have really good conversations with lawyers and judges and some non-attorney advocates. But I don't have a lot of opportunity to hang out with people who are in the construction trades or baristas or people who work in accounting who have visible or invisible disabilities. As I said, I don't really know if I believe in the invisible. It's just a matter of, are you on the lookout for it? Can you spot it? And I'm not willing to concede the way I live is it's not obvious that I think differently than other folks. I think it is quite obvious. If you're me, it's quite obvious. And if you know me, it's quite obvious. And if you don't say, all middle-aged white guys look the same, you'll say, yeah, that's David. And if you don't think every lawyer thinks the same, you say, that looks like something David would have said or would have thought. So I think I am a unique person. I think you're a unique person. We just need to be looking for the value that each of us brings that's different and special. And so I'd love to talk to more folks across Montana about their experiences with invisible or visible disabilities. Who do you have to talk to? I'd love to be one of those people you can talk to. I'd love our audience to be a group of those people you can talk to so that we can start leaning into and lead with our disability identities so that people can say, you know what, I've never had anyone I can talk to about this, but there is a community. There are over 25% of Montanans have a disability. So every fourth, out of four people, at least one will have a disability. That means a family of four, you're likely to have someone in your immediate family. In your aunts and uncles, there's probably two more. In your office, if you work with 15 people, there's 3 or 4 people there who have disabilities. But is everybody out? Is everybody talking about their their work to take control of their mental health and deal with their cancer diagnosis, or to deal with their diabetes, or the work they've done to pay every time they move to move their ramp and get into their apartment, or the work that they've done to widen the doors in their apartment, and now they don't want to move even though the rent has gone up. They can't afford it. Who do you have to commiserate on that and problem solve with that? We here at Growth Rings want to be a space where Montana can get together and talk about this. We can have recorded sessions like this where Montanans can, as we say in the media area, asynchronously consume content about this. But maybe we can even set up some live environments in person and online where people can jump on and build community, share their stories, and lead with your disability identity. Because when you lead with your disability identity, you invite other people to join you in a disability community. And then we invite Montana to join us in our disability community. And Montana's culture becomes a disability culture. That's the goal of this podcast, is to be a space where we can build disability culture across Montana and make Montana politics and economics and recreation all embrace disability, expect disability. If you call a fishing outfitter, they know how to support your physical or sensory disability or your neurodivergence. If you call up a legislator and start talking about how your disability impacts you, they're taking notes because you are offering them golden information they can't get anywhere else about how the disability community is being impacted by the policies they craft. And hopefully politicians see that there is strength and value in running as a disabled politician, that business owners see that there's strength and value in identifying with and communicating with their community as a disabled business owner, and that workers and students and teachers and community members all say, bringing my whole self to this environment is possible because Montana culture is disability culture. So I thank you for talking with me a little bit today about disability identity. And I hope to talk to you again about some other important disability culture issues in the podcast to come. Thanks. Hey, this is a perfect time to subscribe to the podcast. Just click below and you'll get notified when we have new updates. And of course, share with your friends, text them, social, however you can get the word out. And you can also subscribe to our Substack. That's where you'll get more material, go deeper dives, written and additional video and audio will be displayed there. So please join the Growth Rings family. Subscribe here and subscribe on Substack. Thanks.